Moments ago, Pastor David Jeremiah's wife made an announcement that no one saw coming, and it's already sending shockwaves through the faith community. What she shared has people talking, praying, and wondering what this means for the future of one of the most respected voices in Christian ministry. Was it personal? Was it about the church? Or something even bigger? One thing's for sure, this changes everything. The news broke quietly at first. A short, heartfelt statement released by Donna Jeremiah, wife of renowned pastor and author Dr. David Jeremiah. At first glance, it looked like another personal update, the kind that surfaces now and then from well-known ministry families. But within minutes, it became clear. This wasn't just a simple family message. It was something far more serious, and something no one expected. In her carefully worded message, Donna revealed a truth that stunned both their followers and the broader Christian world. Her husband, one of the most respected evangelical voices in America, had recently come forward to her about his lifelong struggle with his sexual identity. She confirmed, with grace and emotional honesty, that David Jeremiah identifies as a man with same-sex attraction, a truth he had carried silently for years. The announcement, though calm in tone, sent shockwaves through religious circles. Social media erupted. Pastors, theologians, church members, and longtime followers of Dr. Jeremiah didn't know what to think. Some responded with disbelief. Others reacted with sympathy. Many were simply speechless. David Jeremiah, a man known for his powerful sermons, conservative values, and decades of unwavering leadership, had never been linked to any personal scandal. His teachings reached millions around the globe. His books lined Christian bookshelves everywhere. For decades, he stood as a symbol of clarity and conviction in a fast-changing world. Now that image had been shaken, not by an accusation, not by a fall from grace, but by a deeply personal truth coming to light. A truth that challenged long-held assumptions about him, his family, and the church he had helped lead. No one saw it coming, but once the words were out, they couldn't be taken back. And across the faith community, one question echoed louder than the rest. What happens now? When Donna Jeremiah made her unexpected and deeply personal statement about her husband, David Jeremiah, the reaction across the Christian world was swift and complicated. For many, it felt like the ground had shifted under their feet. This wasn't just any pastor. This was David Jeremiah, a man whose sermons reached millions every week, whose books filled Christian bookstores, and whose face was a familiar one on Sunday morning broadcasts. He wasn't just a preacher. To some, he was a spiritual father, a leader, even a hero. And now, suddenly, that image was being challenged in a way few had imagined. At first, most people didn't know what to say. Some thought it had to be a mistake or a misquote. Others waited for a denial or clarification. But as the reality of Donna's words settled in, that her husband, after decades of ministry, was someone who had quietly carried a part of himself in silence, the reactions started pouring in from all corners. In the pews of Shadow Mountain Community Church, where David had preached for decades, the news hit hard. Some members sat in stunned silence during Sunday service, trying to make sense of it all. There were tears of confusion, betrayal, sorrow. Others responded with quiet grace, hugging each other, whispering prayers, and choosing love over judgment. For them, David's humanity didn't erase the years of guidance he had given. If anything, it made him more real. "He's still my pastor," one woman said tearfully, "and I still believe God used him to change my life." But not everyone was ready to show grace. In some corners of the evangelical world, the backlash was immediate and sharp. Well-known Christian commentators and influencers took to social media, some calling the situation heartbreaking, while others labeled it a sign of the times. A few went further, accusing David of hypocrisy or demanding his resignation. For these voices, the issue wasn't just about orientation, it was about trust, theology, and what it means to lead a church. One tweet, which quickly went viral, read, "If a shepherd cannot walk in the truth, he cannot lead the sheep." Another pastor posted a video response where he said, "We love David, but we cannot compromise the word of God for the sake of reputation or comfort." These statements, while wrapped in scriptural language, left little room for the complexities of personal struggle, lifelong faithfulness, and the courage it takes to be honest in such a public way. Still, amidst the noise, there were quieter, more thoughtful voices. Some leaders spoke with empathy, acknowledging the pain that must have built up over years of hiding and conflict. A younger generation of pastors, many of whom have been advocating for more open, compassionate conversations around LGBTQ+ issues, used the moment to call for introspection. One pastor in Portland wrote, "What if this isn't a scandal? What if it's an opportunity to become a more honest, more loving church?" Online, the conversation was messy and emotional. Facebook comment sections overflowed with everything from Bible verses to open letters of support. People shared their own stories of being closeted in church, of feeling rejected by their communities, or of walking away from faith entirely because of the lack of space for their truth. In a strange way, Donna's statement opened a floodgate, not just about David Jeremiah, but about how the church deals with silence, shame, and the realities people live with. Many Christian parents of LGBTQ+ children felt especially connected to the moment. Some wrote about how they had long admired David Jeremiah's teachings, but struggled with reconciling those messages with the experiences of their own kids. For them, this news brought both sorrow and hope. "If someone like David Jeremiah has been carrying this," one mother wrote, "maybe my son's faith still has a place in the church." Meanwhile, conservative Christian media outlets treaded carefully. Some chose not to report the story at all, worried it would create division or tarnish a legacy. Others issued brief statements, often emphasizing the importance of prayer and cautioning against rushing to judgment. A few hinted at disappointment, suggesting that personal struggles should have remained private, but the story was already out there, and silence, in many ways, spoke just as loudly as words. Interestingly, secular media picked up the story too, though with a different tone. For some outside the church, it seemed to confirm long-held criticisms about religious hypocrisy or the pressures of evangelical culture, but even there you could find moments of genuine compassion. Some journalists framed the story as a tragic tale of someone who spent his life helping others while being unable to fully live his own truth. Back inside the church walls, conversations were getting more personal. Bible study groups and prayer circles were suddenly discussing things they had never touched before: sexuality, mental health, authenticity. Some churches used the moment to address the broader question of how Christians should treat people who come forward with difficult truths. In more progressive congregations, the message was clear. This is why we need to be a place where people can be fully known and still fully loved. But in more traditional settings, the mood was quieter, almost anxious. Many felt torn. They loved David Jeremiah. They were grateful for his leadership, but they didn't know what to do with this new information. Some felt betrayed, as if part of their spiritual journey had been built on a hidden foundation. Others simply didn't want to talk about it, hoping the storm would pass and things would return to normal. For pastors, it was a delicate moment. Some used it as a teaching opportunity, encouraging their flocks to wrestle with grace and truth. Others avoided the topic altogether, worried about controversy or division. One pastor in Texas said privately, "It's not just about David. It's about whether the church is ready to handle real people with real struggles." And that may be the heart of it. Donna Jeremiah's statement didn't just reveal something about her husband. It held up a mirror to the church. It forced a conversation that many have long avoided. A conversation about what it means to lead, to believe, to belong. A conversation about whether love really can be unconditional, or whether there are still hidden lines that, once crossed, change everything. In the end, the reaction was not just about David Jeremiah. It was about the people listening, about their hopes, their fears, their willingness, or unwillingness to sit with complexity. Some responded with judgment, others with grace. But almost everyone, in one way or another, was affected. This moment will not be forgotten quickly. It has stirred something deep, and as the dust continues to settle, many are left asking a quiet but powerful question. Can the church be a place where truth and love meet, even when the truth is hard to hear? David and Donna Jeremiah were, for decades, seen as the perfect couple in Christian circles. People would look at them and see strength, stability, and unity. They'd walk into a church together, him with his confident stride and calm voice, her with her gentle smile and quiet presence, and people felt inspired. Together, they built a ministry that reached millions. But behind all the sermons and public appearances was a very real, very human marriage, full of complexities no one saw. They met young. Back then, David was a passionate, rising preacher, already filled with vision and purpose. Donna was drawn to his dedication, his faith, and the sense that his life was headed in a clear direction. Their connection was real. They loved each other, and they believed in the same mission, to serve God and help others do the same. Marriage for them was not just a personal decision, it was also a shared calling. In the early years, like most young couples, they dreamed big. Church planting, growing a family, spreading the gospel. That was the life they chose, and they gave it everything. As David's influence grew, so did the demands. There were conferences to attend, books to write, messages to prepare, people to counsel. Donna stood beside him through it all, never seeking the spotlight, but always playing a quiet, essential role. She raised their children, managed their home, supported his schedule, and carried more weight than most people realized. But within their private life, there were moments of silence that weren't just about being tired or busy. Over time, Donna began to feel something deeper, a kind of emotional distance that didn't quite fit with the image they had built together. She didn't have all the answers. There weren't fights, really. David wasn't cruel or absent. In fact, he was always respectful, kind, and full of faith. But something was missing. A part of him always felt hidden, closed off. And the truth is, David knew it too. He carried something inside him for as long as he could remember. Something he didn't understand as a teenager, something he hoped would go away when he fell in love, something he believed could be prayed through. When he became a pastor, he was raised in a time and place where there wasn't room to talk about sexuality, especially not anything outside the lines. Being gay, or even questioning, was unthinkable in the world he lived in. It wasn't just seen as wrong, it was seen as shameful, dangerous, disqualifying. So he buried it. He buried it under layers of scripture, under long workdays, under the steady rhythm of ministry. He believed that if he just did enough good, lived well enough, preached with enough conviction, maybe he could outrun that part of himself. Maybe God would take it away. And so he pressed on, year after year, with a deep love for the Word, for his congregation, for his wife and family, but also with a growing weight inside his soul. Donna, over time, began to sense that weight. Even if she didn't know exactly what it was, she could feel the pressure he was under, the emotional exhaustion, the late nights staring at nothing, the way certain topics would shut down a conversation. She prayed for him, she stood by him, and she quietly carried her own ache, not knowing what was really going on, but feeling its presence in the quiet moments they shared. The years passed, and the ministry flourished. Outwardly, their life looked blessed. Books were bestsellers. Sermons were broadcast worldwide. People came forward every week to say how David's message had changed their lives. But inside the walls of their home, something remained unresolved. David wrestled with God in the dark, literally and metaphorically. He would sit alone in his study, asking the same questions over and over again. Why me? Why haven't you taken this from me? Am I a fraud? Can I still be used by God if this is part of who I am? He tried to be the man he believed he had to be, not because he didn't love Donna. He did. And not because he didn't believe in the gospel. He absolutely did. But because he was scared of what honesty might destroy. His family, his church, his reputation, everything he had spent a lifetime building. Donna finally learned the full truth gradually, not through one big confession, but through many small, painful conversations. They were quiet, tearful moments, late-night talks that started with, "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" There were pauses, long silences, moments when she didn't know what to say. But through it all, there was love, a deep, enduring love, not always the romantic kind, but the kind that chooses to stay when it would be easier to walk away. It wasn't easy. There was grief, confusion, and heartbreak. Donna had to come to terms with the fact that the marriage she thought she had wasn't what it seemed. David had to come to terms with the fact that hiding had only deepened the pain, but neither of them made their decisions lightly. They both prayed, a lot. They talked to counselors. They read scripture. They cried alone and together. And slowly, they came to a place of understanding. Not perfect, not tied up with a neat little bow, but honest. They decided to stay together, not out of duty, but because their love had changed. It had matured into something that could hold truth, even hard truth. They became companions on a journey no one else could fully understand. They stopped pretending everything was okay and started living in a new kind of reality, one where the truth, however complicated, could finally breathe. And this is the part many people might struggle to understand. There wasn't a villain in their story. David didn't set out to deceive anyone. Donna didn't choose denial. They both acted out of love, faith, and hope. They both wanted to serve God the best way they knew how. They were trapped, in many ways, by the expectations of a world that never gave them permission to be fully human. When Donna finally made the public statement, it wasn't an act of betrayal. It was a release, a way of saying, this is who we are, this is what we've carried, and we can't carry it alone anymore. It was an act of courage, not to tear down, but to set free, to stop pretending, to stop hiding, and maybe, just maybe, to make space for others who are still living in fear. Their story isn't over, and it's not clean or simple, but it's real. It's full of faith, failure, grace, and truth, and in the end, that might be the most powerful testimony of all, not of perfection, but of perseverance, not of having all the answers, but of choosing love even when the questions hurt. After the news broke, after the statement was shared and the dust started to settle, one big question remained on everyone's mind. What now? What happens next for David Jeremiah, for his church, for the people who followed his teachings for years, and for the larger Christian community that's now staring at something it can't easily ignore? For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. Almost. People were waiting to see if David would speak publicly. Would he step down? Would he stay silent? Would he try to defend himself, or maybe just disappear? Every move was being watched closely, not just by his followers, but by the entire religious world. And then there were the conversations happening in private, behind closed doors. Church elders sitting around long tables, trying to figure out what this meant for their leadership. Pastors texting each other late at night. Did you see the news? What would you do if this happened at your church? People weren't just reacting emotionally. They were trying to process, to plan, to predict. Some believed the answer was simple. He had to step away. Not out of anger, they said, but because leadership came with a certain set of expectations. And if those expectations were broken, even in silence, trust was too. It's not about judging him, one church board member was overheard saying. It's about protecting the integrity of the ministry. But others weren't so sure. Some felt that this could be a turning point, not just for David Jeremiah, but for how the church sees people like him. Maybe this wasn't about disqualification, but about learning how to lead with a different kind of honesty. Maybe the model of a perfect, polished preacher needed to evolve. In the middle of all this uncertainty was the man himself. David wasn't rushing to release statements or hold press conferences. According to close friends, he was spending time with family, meeting with trusted counselors, and praying deeply, not for a way to fix the situation, but for the wisdom to move forward in truth, whatever that looked like. Some said he looked lighter, more at peace than he had in years. Others noticed how tired he seemed, like the weight of all those decades had finally caught up to him. Either way, it was clear he wasn't going to make any fast decisions. He'd spent his life telling people to listen for God's voice in the storm. Now he had to do the same. Meanwhile, his church was caught in a strange limbo. Some members left quietly, unable to reconcile the news with the man they once saw as unshakable. Others stayed, not because they had all the answers, but because they believed the church had to be a place where real people with real stories could still find hope. There were meetings, long, emotional meetings. Some people spoke through tears, others through clenched fists. "I gave my life to Christ in this church," one woman said. "I don't want to throw it all away because of one chapter in a long book." A man in his 50s said he felt betrayed. "I trusted him," he said. "I modeled my life after his. Now I don't know what to believe." But then a younger man stood up. He looked nervous, like it took everything in him to speak. "I'm gay," he said quietly, "and this is the first time I've ever felt like maybe there's a place for me in this church." You could have heard a pin drop. That moment changed something. Not everything, but something. Other churches began to talk too. Some distanced themselves from David, pulling his books off their shelves or canceling speaking events. Others leaned in, saying maybe this was exactly the kind of thing Jesus would have shown compassion for, not because it's easy, but because it's human. Because every person who walks into a church is carrying something they didn't ask for, and the gospel was never meant to be only for the ones who look put together on the outside. In the wider Christian world, the ripple effects kept spreading. Magazines, podcasts, YouTube channels, everyone had something to say. Some framed it as the fall of another Christian leader. Others called it a moment of reckoning. For a church that's been too afraid to face hard truths, a few even dared to ask, what if this is a gift? What if it's an invitation to reimagine what faith, grace, and leadership really look like? Of course, not everyone welcomed that idea. Some feared a slippery slope, that if David Jeremiah could stay in ministry even after such a revelation, then where would the line be drawn? They weren't trying to be cruel, they were trying to protect something sacred, but others asked, sacred for who and at what cost? Donna, through all this, remained mostly silent. She had said what she needed to say, and now she was just trying to breathe again, to live in a world where the truth was finally out. Friends said she was both relieved and heartbroken. She loved David. She always had, but she also knew their story would never be simple again. Maybe it never was. And then there were people outside the church watching it all unfold. Some rolled their eyes, saying it was just more proof that religion was full of secrets. Others were moved. "I never thought I'd care about a pastor's personal life," one non-religious man tweeted, "but something about this story feels real. Like maybe there's hope for change, even in the most unlikely places." So, what happens next? The honest answer is no one really knows. Not yet. Will David Jeremiah continue to preach? Possibly. Will some people leave his church because of this? Almost certainly. Will others stay and fight for a more honest, more compassionate kind of Christianity? Without a doubt. But deeper than that, beneath the headlines, the tweets, the Sunday sermons, there's a quiet shift happening. A seed being planted. People are starting to ask better questions. Not just, is this allowed, but what does love require of us here? Not, does this disqualify him, but what does it mean to lead with truth? It might not look like revival. It might not come with music and lights and packed altars, but maybe it's something even more powerful. Rethinking, rebuilding, coming back to the core of what faith was always meant to be. And that's not just David's story now. That's all of ours.